I'm Laura McNamara reporting from Minneapolis, Minnesota at the ACE Annual Conference. Joining me down is Tom Kloza. Can you go ahead and introduce yourself for us?
Sure. I founded Oil Price Information Service back in 1980, and I'm currently working as Chief Energy Advisor for Gulf Oil.
And you were kind of giving an update on where Gulf oil prices are at. You opened with a lot of humor. People seem to appreciate that. Can you kind of kick us off? Why do you decide to open it that way, kind of ease the tension a little bit?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are missing the big picture out there. They're concentrating on Strait of Hormuz, but they don't realize that the overarching problem we're seeing right now in the world is a shortage of refining capacity. Not a shortage because of bad planning, but a shortage because drones have been taking out refineries in Russia as well as in the Persian Gulf and more recently in the Red Sea. And that is a game changer like the Gatling gun when it was introduced back in 1865 or so.
And you said that seemed to be a point that people were missing. They weren't factoring it.
They are missing that. You know, people tend to concentrate on the price of crude, which has been moderate. I mean, if you average the price of crude oil for the last 25 years, you come up with a number very close to where we are. So crude oil prices are by no means extraordinary. Prices for gasoline and diesel are, though. Gasoline costs about $140 most of the world, ex-tax, and diesel fetches a price of about $180, and I think it could go well over $200 a barrel before this is over.
You were also talking about how the Chinese were acting unpredictably, and that's influencing prices a lot, making it harder to really determine where the market's going to land.
Yeah, China has a command economy, which is to say that if Xi wants them to use less fuel or to adopt electric vehicles, they'll do that. Last month, 62% of the vehicle sales in China were to electric vehicles. So, you know, the big wild card and the huge surprise in 2026 was that China was not importing anywhere near the 11.5 and 12 million barrels a day of crude oil that they were earlier. They were operating with maybe 8 or 8.5 million barrels a day, and that's why we didn't see quite the strength in crude oil prices that we saw in refined products.
Okay, another point you brought up was that diesel and jet fuel are kind of paying the bills, so to speak.
They're not just paying the bills; they're paying the bills for what may be an incredible party for refineries. I mean, through the first 30 or 40 years of my career, gasoline might have cost $10 to $20 over crude, and diesel fetched maybe premiums of $5 to $15. Nowadays, we're looking at $100 $100 margins for diesel fuel. And we're not looking at it just in the United States, it's in the rest of the world as well. So, you know, these are windfall profits. I should emphasize that refiners aren't doing anything wrong. But if you were to identify the biggest beneficiaries of what's happened, they are the beneficiaries, in the U.S. in particular.
You also kind of tipped your hat to Trump, saying he was using social media, Twitter specifically, now known as X, as kind of like a bully pulpit of the former years.
Yeah, I call it the bully keyboard, assuming that he makes these Truth Social posts on a keyboard or whatever. But I don't think it's three-dimensional chess, but he's been very successful in talking the price of crude down. A lot of financial funds and other people who would bet on higher crude prices are reluctant to do that because one of these verbal interventions can send the price of crude oil down $5 to $10 in an instant. I'm a little surprised he hasn't taken the same tact with gasoline or diesel. I think it would be awful policy to pursue speed bumps on exports or windfall profits on refineries, but to merely mention it could send a lot of speculative money out of the market.
And you also pointed out that U.S. was actually in a good position globally.
The U.S. is by far the most privileged continent. We've got cheap crude, we've got cheap natural gas, very cheap natural gas, an expert workforce, and you know people don't realize that we've added 1 million barrels a day of Gulf Coast refining capacity since Katrina. So we're in shape, and we are actually a supplier to probably more than 40 countries of diesel and gasoline.
Okay, great. And then you did have some warnings to keep your eye out with the Houthis, and you also had a funny saying with Yabba Dabba Yanbu.
Yeah, I mean, my mnemonic for remembering it is Yabba Dabba Yanbu. Yanbu is a port on the Red Sea that the Saudis have been using to move about 4 to 5 million barrels a day of crude oil, ultimately through the Suez Canal or through the Red Sea. It is mentioned quite frequently as a target of the Houthis. And if you knock out a port that's responsible for 4 or 5 million barrels a day in this world, it's going to have a great, great impact. So far, so good. No attacks, but my overarching point was that drone warfare is really the big game changer that people need to recognize right now.
Yeah, that was the point that you seemed to stress most significantly. Are there any final comments you'd like to add?
No, the only final comment I would say is that you're going to see wild fluctuations, and you might see wild fluctuation lower very shortly. Just because, well, we've never seen diesel fetch prices $100 over crude. But I think ultimately, over the next 6 months, we're looking at a very, very scary picture where we could see $5, $6, $7 diesel. And, gasoline, I think we're through the worst of it. The gasoline season ends in about 10 days. So I think we're okay there. But for diesel and for other products like marine fuel, I think we've got some problems.
I'm sorry, there's one more point I wanted to touch upon, and you said that now is the market. If there were ever any market for blended fuels, now would be the market.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the price of ethanol and you look at the advantage in using an E15 with a little bit higher octane, it's a terrific environment for it. Economically, it makes perfect sense. It's just that there is still that stigma. I started using it probably a month ago, and people tell me, oh, my car warranty will be voided if I use it. And that's something that's very difficult to overcome.
Okay, well, thank you so much for your time today. I'm Laura McNamara, reporting from Minneapolis, Minnesota.